There's a strange feeling a lot of people get when they look at their electricity bill, but they can't really explain it. It's not just about the number being high. It's something deeper than that, almost like something doesn't quite add up. You start thinking back on your month. Maybe you were more careful this time. Maybe you turned things off more often, tried to save where you could. But somehow, the bill still feels almost the same. Or worse, it's even higher. And that's when the confusion starts to kick in. Because if you're using less, shouldn't you be paying less too? That would be the logical expectation, right? But the more you pay attention, the more inconsistent it feels. Some months don't match your habits at all, and it leaves you wondering if there's something else affecting the final number. And once that thought crosses your mind, it's hard to ignore it. Before we really get into this, take a second to subscribe and leave a like, because topics like this aren't usually explained in a way that actually makes sense. And once you start noticing these details, you're going to see them everywhere. Also, I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. It's always interesting to see how many people are dealing with the exact same thing. Now here's the part most people don't realize. An electricity bill isn't just a simple reflection of what you use. It's not as direct as use less, pay less like most people assume. There's a whole structure behind it. A system that calculates things in ways that aren't always obvious. And because of that, what you see on your bill doesn't always tell the full story. There are layers to it, factors that most people never even hear about. And once you start understanding those layers, you begin to see why things don't always match up the way you expect. When most people look at their electricity bill, they focus on the final number and nothing else. It's almost automatic. You open it. Your eyes go straight to the total. And whatever that number is, that's what sticks with you. You might feel frustrated, maybe even a little confused, but then you just move on and pay it because, realistically, what else are you supposed to do? But what's interesting is that almost no one actually stops to understand how that number is built in the first place. It just feels like something fixed, something that comes from the system and can't really be questioned. And over time, that habit becomes normal. You stop analyzing it, you stop comparing it, and you just accept it. Now here's where things start to get a little more interesting. If you actually take a moment to look beyond the total and start paying attention to the details, you'll notice that your bill isn't just one simple charge. It's made up of different components, different calculations, and different factors that all come together to form that final number you see. And the truth is, most people don't even realize how complex that structure really is. Because it's not just about how much electricity you use. It's also about when you use it, how the demand is distributed across the grid, how energy is generated at that moment, and even how the system itself is designed to handle consumption. All of these things can influence what you end up paying, even if your personal usage doesn't change that much. That's why sometimes 2 months that feel almost identical in terms of your habits can still result in very different bills. And that's where that strange feeling starts to come from. Because deep down, your brain is trying to make sense of something that doesn't seem consistent. You expect a clear cause and effect. Use less, pay less, but the reality doesn't always follow that pattern. So naturally, you start to question it, not in a dramatic way. Not like you're trying to figure out a big system, but just enough to notice that something feels off. And once that awareness starts to grow, it becomes harder to ignore, because now you're not just seeing the bill as a number anymore. You're starting to see it as a result of something more complex, something that isn't fully transparent. And that's an important shift, because the moment you stop seeing something as fixed and start seeing it as constructed, you begin to realize that there might be parts of it you don't fully understand yet. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong happening. It doesn't automatically mean there's a problem or something unfair. But it does mean that the system is more complicated than most people think. And complexity often creates distance between what's actually happening and what people believe is happening. That gap is where confusion lives. That's why so many people feel like their electricity bill doesn't fully reflect their behavior. It's not always because they're imagining things. It's because there are factors they're not aware of. And when you don't have full visibility, everything starts to feel unpredictable. 1 month feels manageable. The next one feels higher for no clear reason. And over time, that creates frustration. But here's the key part most people never consider. If something feels inconsistent, it usually means there's more to it than what's visible on the surface. And when you start thinking that way, your perspective changes. Instead of just reacting to the bill, you begin to observe it. You begin to compare. You begin to notice patterns. And sometimes those patterns don't align with what you've been told to expect. That's when curiosity really starts to take over. Because now you're not just asking, why is my bill high? You're asking, how is this actually being calculated? And those are two very different questions. One is reactive. The other is investigative. And once you shift into that second mindset, you start seeing things differently. You start realizing that what you've been treating as a simple expense is actually part of a much bigger system. A system that most people rely on, but very few truly understand. And that realization alone is enough to make you look at your electricity bill in a completely different way. Before we go any further, there's something worth mentioning. Some people, after noticing these inconsistencies, have started looking into alternative ways to better understand and even optimize how they use electricity at home, not in a complicated or technical way, but through simple ideas and setups that help them see things from a different perspective. If you're curious about what they're exploring and how it works, there's a link in the description where you can take a closer look and decide for yourself. Now, once you start paying attention to how your bill behaves over time, something interesting begins to happen. You stop seeing it as random. At first, it feels unpredictable. Numbers go up, go down, sometimes don't match your expectations at all. But when you look at it over a longer period, small patterns begin to appear. And those patterns raise even more questions, because you start realizing that your bill isn't just reacting to what you do, it's also reacting to how the system around you operates. Think about peak hours, for example. Most people don't really consider when they're using electricity. They just use it whenever they need to. But behind the scenes, energy demand is constantly shifting throughout the day. There are moments when demand is high, moments when it's lower, and the system adjusts accordingly. That alone can influence costs more than people realize. Now combine that with everything else: infrastructure, distribution, maintenance, regional factors, and suddenly that simple bill starts looking a lot more complex. And here's where things start to shift in a bigger way. Because once you realize that the system itself plays such a big role, it changes how you think about control. Most people believe they have very little control over their electricity costs. They assume their only option is to use less, turn things off, limit consumption. But what if that's only part of the equation? What if understanding the system gives you a different kind of advantage? Not by replacing it, but by interacting with it more intelligently. That idea alone opens up a completely different perspective, because now it's not just about reducing usage. It's about understanding how energy behaves. And once you start thinking in those terms, curiosity naturally leads to experimentation, not in a complicated or risky way, but in small, controlled ways. Some people start testing simple adjustments in their routines. Others go a step further and explore basic setups that allow them to observe how energy flows in a more direct way. And what's interesting is not just the results they get, but what they learn in the process. Because for the first time, they're not just consuming energy. They're paying attention to it. They're interacting with it. They're trying to understand it beyond just a monthly bill. And that shift is powerful, because knowledge changes behavior. And behavior, over time, changes results. Now, this doesn't mean there's a single solution that works for everyone. Different homes, different locations, different setups, everything varies. But the important part is that once people start exploring, they realize something most never even consider. There are more possibilities than they initially thought. Not necessarily dramatic, life-changing transformations overnight, but small insights that add up over time. And sometimes, those small insights lead to bigger discoveries. Because once you understand how something works, even at a basic level, you start seeing opportunities where others don't. You begin to notice inefficiencies. You begin to question habits. You begin to think differently about something that once felt completely fixed. And that's where the real shift happens. Not in the system itself, but in your relationship with it. Because instead of feeling like you're stuck within it, you start feeling like you can navigate it, even if just a little. And that little is often where everything begins. At a certain point, you stop looking at your electricity bill the same way you used to. It's not just a number anymore. It's not just something you open, react to, and forget. There's a shift that happens almost without you noticing, where you start seeing it as a result of something bigger, something that goes beyond your day-to-day habits. And once that shift happens, it's hard to go back, because now you're aware that what you're paying isn't just about how much you use. It's also about how everything behind the scenes is structured, the system, the timing, the way energy flows and gets distributed. All of that starts to feel a lot more real. And with that awareness comes a different kind of thinking. You begin to question things you never questioned before, not in a negative way, not assuming something is wrong, but simply because you now understand there's more depth to it than what appears on the surface. That's where things get interesting, because when people reach that point, they usually go one of two ways. Some choose to ignore it. They notice the inconsistency. They feel that something is off, but they go back to the routine. They accept it as part of life and move on. And honestly, that's what most people do. But others, they get curious. They start paying closer attention. They begin to connect small details. They compare months, habits, patterns. And little by little, they start building a clearer picture of how things actually work. And that process alone changes everything. Because now, instead of reacting to the system, they're observing it. They're learning from it. They're understanding it. And once you understand something, even at a basic level, you naturally start making different decisions. Not drastic changes, not extreme actions, just small adjustments. More awareness when using certain devices. More attention to timing. More curiosity about how energy behaves in different situations. And over time, those small adjustments begin to compound. That's something people often underestimate. They think change has to be big to matter, but in reality, it's the small, consistent shifts that create the biggest impact over time. Now, here's where it all connects. Because once you combine awareness with curiosity, you start exploring ideas that you would have ignored before. Concepts that once seemed irrelevant suddenly become interesting. Simple setups that people are testing, methods that are being discussed, different ways of looking at energy that go beyond the traditional approach, not as a replacement for everything you already use, but as an additional layer of understanding. And sometimes, just seeing how those ideas work is enough to completely change your perspective, because it removes that feeling of being stuck. It replaces it with a sense of possibility, even if that possibility starts small. And that's the key. This isn't about promising that everything will suddenly change overnight. It's about realizing that there's more to explore than what most people ever consider. And once you reach that point, you have a choice. You can keep doing what you've always done, or you can take a closer look at what's out there. See what people are testing. Understand how these ideas work. And decide for yourself if any of it makes sense in your situation. If you're curious enough to explore that side and see what people are actually doing differently, you can check the link in the description and take a closer look. No pressure, no assumptions, just information for you to analyze on your own. Because at the end of the day, the biggest difference isn't between people who have all the answers and people who don't. It's between those who stay curious and those who stop questioning. And once you start questioning, you never really see things the same way again.